What's going on, guys? It's Red Bull Tanker, and welcome back to Axis and Allies 1951 G40 edition, turn 4. Alright, we have had quite the interesting turn 4, so let's get into it. Alright, the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had 81 IPC. They tried to do diplomacy for Egypt because they could have gotten on a 5 or less. Unfortunately, they too rolled a 1. So now that meant that the Allies could come back and get it for a 5 or less as well. Technology-wise, the Soviets have sent more of their scientists to Siberia because they still cannot seem to get their assault rifles built in what they need. The Soviets also bought, they bought 2 destroyers and a sub for Sea-Zone 5 at Vladivostok. They bought 3 tanks for Germany, and then an infantry and 2 tanks in Slovakia. Alright, combat. Well, the Soviets came down and retook Romania from those from Tito's Yugoslav forces that snuck in and took it. Let's see here. All 5 of the Yugoslav infantry were destroyed, and the Russians suffered no casualties. They went into the battle with 3 tanks, 2 fighters from Germany, and 2 fighters from Poland. Next, we had 2 tanks from southern Germany, and then we had a jet come from Slovakia, and we had... oh, that was it. And they went and took Yugoslavia. Unfortunately, while we killed the U.S. fighter that was based in Yugoslavia, the fighter did kill one of the tanks, so we were left with only 1 tank remaining. Next, the Soviets went after Transjordan/Israel. They attacked with all their forces that were in Iraq, and then they brought this fighter from Turkey. In the end, so the Israeli forces lost 2 infantry, a tank, and a tactical. The Russians lost 3 mech infantry and an artillery. And I believe the battle went 2 rounds for that one. Next, the Soviets did launch 2 strategic bombing raids against southern Italy. They attacked the naval base and the minor industrial complex. Both bombers made it through the AAA defenses, and then the naval base got hit with 3 damage, and the minor got hit for max damage of 6. And then finally, the Tu-4 in Amur, which is the Soviet copy of the B-29, did a strategic bombing raid in Japan. It made it through the flak and also got, It got 6 damage as well. As far as reinforcements, the Soviets continue to push troops into Western Germany, into Southern Germany, and then just doing whatever they can to get forces west. But now, again, because of Yugoslavia and Romania, the Russians have had to divert some of their forces. And then at the end of the turn, the Russians collected 77 IPC, and then they got 8 for bonuses, so the Soviets ended the turn with 85 IPC. Alright, going over to NATO. NATO purchases, they paid off the damage to the naval base and the minor in southern Italy, and then they bought a fighter and 2 tanks for Paris. They did do 1 round of combat. They took their forces from Paris, Belgium, and Denmark, and they attacked into West Germany to try and launch a spoiling attack against the Russians. The Russians had a jet here. They also scrambled the 2 fighters that they scrambled 2 fighters that were also in Germany. If I hadn't explained already, aircraft can scramble to ground battles now as well. in adjacent zones, unless you get if you get radar, if you achieve radar, then you can scramble up to 2 spaces, whether that be sea zones or land zones. And so then the results of the combat in West Germany, the Soviets lost 6 infantry and NATO lost 12 infantry. So it was a very bloody affair for the Brits, or for NATO. NATO didn't really do any non-combats outside of just trying to get forces into Paris and just kind of shuffling around the Mediterranean and in Africa. And then at the end of the turn, NATO collected 35 IPC plus 1 that they saved, but the sub up there once again got them for 3 IPC. So NATO did collect 33 IPC. China couldn't buy anything because, as we saw in turn 3, they had lost their capital. So combat, the Soviets came out of Manchuria and Korea, and the jet from Amur, which actually that needs to go back. That cannot be there, which means I probably screwed something up too. So he has to go to Manchuria, which, no, that's fine. Either way, so they retook the capital, and then there was only a lone U.S. artillery, so it died. And then the Soviets came down, and then the Russians came down here and actually launched a 2-pronged attack. They attacked into Siam, which was successful. They ended up, the casualties were for Sado, 5 infantry, 2 artillery, 4 tanks, 2 fighters, and then 2 fighters retreated into the Shan state. Chinese casualties were 3 infantry, 3 mech. And then, here in Malaya, the Chinese took an infantry, artillery, and tank off of Formosa. They came down, did battle against a British destroyer and a Sado transport that were lost, and were initially able to take Malaya away from the British. Britain only had 3 infantry defending. They all missed. Oh, no, they didn't miss. The infantry and artillery were killed, so a lone Chinese tank was all that was left to defend Malaya. Not really any non-combats because they still got a lot to protect around here. They did move some more forces into French Indochina from Guangxi to back up the attacks there. And then at the end of the turn, China collected 40, plus 3 for bonuses, that bonus being the capture of Formosa. And so they ended the turn with 43. Great Britain. Now we get into more of the comedy of errors. So Britain, they tried to do diplomacy on Egypt because they could get it at a 5 or less. They also offended the Egyptian government, so then it put back to the communist forces them getting it on a 5 or less as well. And then they bought 2 infantry and 2 transports for London, or to come out of London. And then they bought an infantry, artillery, and a transport down here for South Africa. Combat. Alright, so combat. The British took most of their forces out of the Shan state and attacked into Malaya. They killed the enemy tank, but the enemy tank failed on getting its shots in. And then after that was their only combat, the rest was just moving troops around, getting troops into Holland, Belgium. And that was that was pretty much it. They just sent some troops to Holland, Belgium. They were able to get pick up their forces from Canada and are now on their way back. And pretty much it for the Brits. At the end of the turn, they collected. I didn't put what they collected. Britain collected 37 IPC. No, it shouldn't have been 37. No. Oh, I never did. Okay, so Britain should have collected 28 IPC. Yes, 28 IPC. And they have no bonuses, so I'm going to have to fix that. So they have 28 IPC. I'll fix that later. Sato. Sato also tried for Egypt and failed. Then they bought... they tried for assault rifles. That failed. Britain also tried for the transports and failed. No, they did not. Then they bought an infantry and tank, or an infantry and 2 tanks for the Philippines. Bought 2 infantry for Borneo. And then dropped an air transport down here in Sydney. Sato did not conduct any combat. They just shuffled some troops around the Pacific. They moved their ships from Borneo back to the Philippines. And that was about it for them. All right, the United States. The United States had 111 IPC to spend. They took their time. They took their shot at getting Egypt, and they did. They were successful on getting Egypt. They did not do any tech. They did do a lot of purchasing, though. For the eastern United States, just don't want to knock stuff over. For the eastern United States, they bought 2 infantry, 2 airborne infantry and artillery, 2 self-propelled guns, 2 tanks, and a destroyer. And then for the western United States, they bought 4 marine infantry, 2 tanks, 2 destroyers, and then they also paid off the factory. They paid off the factory in Japan and then also bought 2 infantry and a self-propelled gun for Japan. Combat. Combat was a lot of air raids this turn. That was all that consisted. So first, the U.S. For the love of Pete. So the U.S. B-29 up here in Norway came from Britain, launched an attack on Germany. It survived the air battle from scrambling fighters, survived the AAA, and got 6 hits. The B-47 jet bomber from London went down into Slovakia. It survived the anti-aircraft fire from here because anti-aircraft can fire at aircraft passing through a zone. So it survived that AAA, survived the factory AAA, and scored 5 damage on that. And then the U.S. Tactical out of northern Italy tried to do a land convoy raid on Yugoslavia, but they failed. And then over in the Pacific, the U.S. fighter off the USS Midway did a land convoy raid against Shantung and got 1 damage. So the Chinese will -1 from their income at the collect income phase this turn. Or on turn 5. No, on turn 4. The jet... No. Yeah, on turn 4. The jet tried a land convoy raid against Ennui and failed. The B-29 and a tactical hit Manchuria. This jet killed the tactical, but the bomber was able to survive the AAA and scored 4 hits for that factory. And then the B-47 attacked the factory in Amur for 3 damage after surviving the AAA fire. On the non-combat, the U.S. got its forces moving, got its next round of troops moving for Europe. They deployed more units they got more units up into Holland, Belgium. They now have 4 infantry, 2 artillery, 1 self-propelled gun, and 3 tanks. In the Pacific, they moved more of their forces. They moved their forces off from the China coast back to Japan into safer waters. The U.S. is bringing in some reinforcements from the States. And that is that. And then at the end of the turn, the U.S. collected 62 IPC plus 17 for bonuses, so they have 79 for the next turn. All right, well, that is it for turn 4. And we will see you guys next time for turn 5. So until then, guys, as always... Oh, real quick. Victory cities. The communists are still holding at 5 victory cities on both the European and Pacific sides of the board. All right, so that is it for turn 4. And we will see you guys next time for turn 5. So until then, guys, as always, take care.